I'm a millionaire Japanese woman misunderstood by everyone, then one Maid changed everything. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone. I never thought my life would end up like this. I still remember the morning it all began, though I wish I could forget it. My name is Alec Rose, and I lived a life most people would call perfect. I had money, respect, a home that looked like a palace, and people who smiled when they saw me. But what they didn't see, what no one ever saw, was how quietly my world was breaking apart. And it all started that morning. It felt ordinary at first. I woke up, made coffee, watched the sunlight spill over the city skyline, but there was a heaviness in the air I couldn't shake. It was subtle, like the first note of a song that doesn't quite feel right. That morning, I walked to my office like I always did, but the hallway felt colder. The usual greetings were missing. Doors closed just a second too quickly. People avoided my eyes. I laughed it off. I told myself I was imagining things. But by the end of the day, it was no longer imagination. I noticed the small things first, the way my colleagues looked at me in meetings, the way they interrupted me when I spoke, the way they dismissed my ideas. That evening, I overheard a group of people whispering my name. It wasn't gossip about work. It was something different, something deeper, something dangerous. I don't know why I stayed silent that night, but deep down, I felt fear. Not for myself, exactly, but for something I couldn't name yet. The days that followed were worse. Invitations disappeared. Friends stopped calling. At gatherings, conversations stopped when I entered the room. And I began to hear things, comments disguised as jokes, questions that sounded polite but carried sharp edges. I tried to brush them aside. I told myself I was just tired. But it was a pattern now, a growing weight on my chest I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just about being excluded anymore. It was about being targeted. One evening, I was called into a meeting. They didn't call me by name at first. It was as if they forgot I was there. Then they began questioning me. Not about work, but about things I hadn't even said. About choices I hadn't made. About people I barely knew. The questions were designed to make me doubt myself, and somehow they succeeded. I left that day with my hands shaking. At home, I sat in silence, staring at the walls of my apartment. I kept asking myself what happened. When did my life turn into something I couldn't control? And why was no one telling me what was really going on? The answer came sooner than I expected. A small thing, a knock at my door late one night. I didn't expect anyone. No one came to visit me at that hour. I opened the door to find her, a maid I barely knew. She was standing there drenched from the rain, her eyes wide, urgent. She didn't say a word at first. She just handed me an envelope. My name was written on it in careful handwriting. No explanation, no note. Just my name. Something inside me told me to open it immediately, but another part of me hesitated. I could feel her eyes on me. When I looked up, she simply said, "It's time you knew." And then, just like that, she disappeared into the night. I stood there frozen, my hand still holding the envelope. I knew that inside it was something that would change everything. Something dangerous. Something true. Something no one wanted me to know. And in that moment, I realized my life was no longer mine. That night, I sat alone and opened it. Inside were papers, photos, and a single note that said, "This is why they fear you." I didn't understand, but I knew one thing. My life was about to change forever. And it did. I couldn't sleep that night. The envelope sat on my desk like a heavy weight, daring me to open it again. My hands kept trembling. I told myself to wait, to breathe. But curiosity fears something inside me was pulling me forward. Finally, I unfolded the papers. There were photographs. Old photographs. Some of me, smiling, dressed in clothes I barely remembered wearing. Others of people I had never met, faces blurred, places I didn't recognize. But the strangest part wasn't the pictures themselves. It was the way they seemed connected, like pieces of a puzzle that had been hidden from me my whole life. And then I found the note again. It said, "This is why they fear you." My mind raced. Who were they? And why did they fear me? My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I spent hours going through every single paper in the envelope. There were documents, letters, records, things that hinted at a truth bigger than me. Things about people, power, influence, and at the center of it all, my name. But not in a way I understood. I didn't want to believe it, but a part of me felt something shifting, something dangerous. The next morning, I went to work as usual, but I couldn't focus. Every conversation, every glance felt loaded. I kept replaying the envelope in my mind, and then it happened. Someone slipped a note under my office door. No envelope this time, just a piece of paper with one sentence: "Stop looking." Fear turned into something sharper. Defiance. I knew now that this wasn't just about gossip or misunderstandings. This was about control, about hiding something. And someone wanted to keep me silent. That evening, I went home and found her again, the maid. She was standing outside my apartment in the shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes full of something between urgency and fear. Without a word, she handed me another envelope. Then, just like before, she vanished into the night. Inside, this envelope was different. There were names, dates, places. It looked like evidence. But it wasn't just evidence, it was a map to something much bigger. My hands shook as I stared at it, and then, at the bottom of the page, a single phrase was written: "They will stop at nothing." I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what I had stumbled into. But I knew one thing: I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close to the truth. The next morning, I left my apartment with a sense of purpose and dread I had never felt before. I knew the world I knew was gone. I didn't know if I would ever come back. But one thing was certain: my life was no longer mine to control. And I was ready to find out why. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept staring at the map, tracing the names and places with my finger, trying to make sense of it. My mind kept turning over the words from the note. They will stop at nothing. Who were they? Why me? Why now? I couldn't tell if I was more afraid of finding the answer or of never finding it. The next day, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to know. I had to follow it, even if it meant stepping into something dangerous. I took the map and my phone, tucked them into my bag, and left my apartment without telling anyone where I was going. I didn't even know where there was. All I knew was that it felt like walking into the unknown. The first stop on the map was an old cafe in the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice if you passed by a small brick building, windows clouded with age. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. It smelled of coffee and dust. The air was thick and heavy, as if it held secrets. I ordered a drink, sat by the window, and watched people pass by. I tried to focus, but I couldn't stop glancing at the door. Then he came in. A man I had never seen before. His coat was dark, his face unreadable. He sat 2 tables away from me and stared not at me exactly, but through me. My chest tightened. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But something told me I had to stay. I watched him for what felt like hours. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, looked around, and then slipped it under his coffee cup. Before I could move, he stood and walked out. My curiosity overpowered my caution. I approached the table. The paper was blank. Or so it seemed until I held it closer and the words appeared. "Do not trust anyone, especially her." A wave of dread hit me. Who was her? And why did this stranger warn me about her? My head was spinning. I folded the paper and shoved it into my bag. But deep down, I knew this was no accident. Someone was watching me. Someone was trying to control me. And I had no idea how deep it went. The next few days became a blur of whispers, shadows, and secret meetings. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. My phone rang at strange hours. Anonymous messages filled my inbox, and yet, the more I uncovered, the more I felt pulled in like something invisible was drawing me toward the heart of this mystery. Then came the night that changed everything. I had been following a lead, tracing names on the map, when I found myself in a narrow alley behind an old building. It was quiet. Too quiet. My phone battery was low. I thought about turning back, but curiosity drove me forward, and that's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Behind me. My breath caught. I froze. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure the world could hear it. I didn't look back at first, but the footsteps stopped when I did. The silence was heavier than the noise before it. Then, in a low voice that seemed to echo in the dark, someone said, "You shouldn't be here." I didn't answer. My body was frozen, but my mind screamed. Should I run? Should I confront them? But deep down, I knew there was no going back. Not now, not after everything. A shadow moved closer. My heart skipped a beat. And then, I saw her. The maid, standing there in the darkness. Her eyes wide, her lips trembling. She stepped forward and whispered, "It's too late for you. They already know." I swallowed hard, my body trembling. "Who?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just handed me another envelope and disappeared before I could speak again. Inside the envelope was a photograph, me, alone, but in the background, someone watching, and written at the bottom in bold letters, "The end begins here." My hands shook. I realized this wasn't just a mystery anymore. This was a warning, and I was standing in the middle of it. The night after that, I couldn't sleep at all. My mind replayed the words on the photograph over and over. The end begins here. I didn't know what it meant. Was it a threat, a prediction, or something worse, an invitation? I stared at the envelope on my desk, knowing that inside lay something that could change everything. But opening it felt like stepping over a line I couldn't return from. I didn't hesitate. I tore it open. Inside was another map, more detailed than the first, with locations circled in red. And at the very center, my own name, written in bold letters. My heart raced. It wasn't just a map anymore. It was a target. The next day, I decided to follow the map. It was as if something inside me, the same thing that made me open those first letters, was pulling me forward. The first stop was a run-down warehouse on the edge of town. The air smelled like rust and old rain. I walked inside slowly, my footsteps echoing through the empty space. It felt like a trap. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to turn back, but I kept walking. And then I heard voices, low, whispering. I froze. The voices grew louder, more urgent. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was sharp like people arguing. I stepped closer to the sound and saw a dim light spilling through a door. I leaned toward it, just enough to hear. And then I heard my name. Not just my name. My full name, spoken with a coldness that made my blood run ice cold. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed the door open. Inside, the warehouse was filled with faces I didn't recognize, but they all turned to look at me at once. The air was tense, heavy. In the middle of the room was a table with documents, photographs, and a laptop glowing in the darkness. The maid stood there too, but her expression was different now, serious, almost desperate. One of the men stepped forward. His voice was calm but dangerous. "Alik Rose," he said, "you weren't supposed to find this. But now that you have, there's no turning back." My chest tightened. "What is this? Who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the table. On it were pictures of people I knew, places I'd been, conversations I'd never spoken about. All of it was organized like evidence, and in the center, under a spotlight of its own, was a photograph of me standing in my apartment, taken without my knowledge. The room seemed to close in around me. My heart pounded, my hands shook. I wanted to scream, but the words got stuck in my throat. Then the maid stepped forward. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They've been watching you for years. This isn't just about what you found, it's about what you are. And now, they're coming for you." Before I could speak, the lights went out. Complete darkness. The sound of footsteps, quick and heavy, filled the space. I felt someone grab my arm. My breath quickened. My mind screamed to run, but I was rooted in fear. And then, the lights came back on. The people in the room were gone. The table, the documents, everything was gone except the maid, and a single envelope lying on the floor where the table had been. I picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a single message: "This is your last warning." I stumbled backward. My knees gave out. I collapsed to the floor, clutching the envelope like it was the only thing keeping me alive. My mind was spinning. My life had changed forever. I knew there was no going back. And deep inside, I understood something terrifying. This was no longer a mystery. This was war. I woke the next morning still clutching that envelope. My head throbbed. My whole body felt heavy, like I had been carrying the weight of something I wasn't meant to understand. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the night before. Who were they, and why was I being dragged into this? The maid's words echoed in my mind. "They've been watching you for years. This isn't just about what you found, it's about what you are." I didn't understand them then, but part of me feared I would. I knew I had a choice. I could walk away, hide, pretend it never happened. But every instinct in me said no. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about truth. I opened the envelope one last time. Inside was a single slip of paper with one line: "Find the place where it all began." There was no address, no map, just those words. My hands tightened around it. I knew I couldn't ignore them. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was the end of my search. I spent the day preparing, packing what I could carry, writing a note in case something happened to me. And then, without telling anyone, I set off. I followed an instinct I didn't fully understand, guided only by the feeling that something awaited me at the end of this journey. The place turned out to be an old, forgotten train station on the edge of the city. The air smelled of rust and rain, and the silence was deafening. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty hall. There was a single chair in the middle of the room. On it sat an envelope. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of me, standing there. But in the background was the maid, smiling faintly, holding something I couldn't make out. And beneath it, in handwriting I somehow recognized as mine, were the words, "You were never alone. Now, decide what you will do." The moment hit me like a wave. Everything made sense. All the fear, all the danger. It wasn't random. I wasn't chosen by accident. I was part of something much bigger. Something I could no longer run from. The station lights flickered. A voice broke the silence, a voice I knew. It was the maid. "Alik, this is your choice. Fight or disappear." I stood there trembling, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I realized I had reached the end of the line, but also the beginning of something new. I could turn away, or I could stand up and face them. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. Because I knew one thing for certain, my story wouldn't end here. Not now, not ever. And as I walked into the shadows, I asked myself, how many more Alec Roses will they silence before the truth finally comes out?